Have you ever stopped to think about how one of the most fortified cities of antiquity simply crumbled in a matter of moments? We're talking about Jericho, a fortress that seemed invincible, with walls so high and thick that they defied any army of the time. And yet something happened in that place that even today makes archaeologists, historians, and scientists debate between faith and physics, between the divine and the human. What really brought down the walls of Jericho? Stay with me until the end, because what you're about to discover may completely change the way you see one of the most enigmatic events in ancient history. Imagine for a moment standing before walls that rise more than 10 meters high, built with massive stones that took generations to pile up. Imagine being a soldier looking at that seemingly eternal barrier, knowing that on the other side lies an entire city protected by layers of defense that had never been breached. Jericho was not just a city, it was a symbol of power. It was the gateway to the Promised Land, and it was considered absolutely impregnable. But then something extraordinary happened. According to ancient accounts, for 7 consecutive days, an army marched around those walls in absolute silence. Only the sound of synchronized footsteps and trumpets echoing in the dry desert air. On the 7th day, after the 7th lap, a collective shout broke the silence, and the walls simply collapsed. They fell as if the ground itself had opened up to swallow them. Have you ever experienced something that seemed impossible until the moment it happened? The story of Jericho has spanned millennia, recorded in sacred texts, recounted in synagogues, churches, and mosques, debated in universities and laboratories. For some, it is irrefutable proof of divine intervention. For others, it is an archaeological enigma that can be explained by earthquakes, structural failures, or ancient warfare techniques that we still do not fully understand. But what is intriguing is not just the event itself, but the precise moment, the perfect timing, the synchronicity between human action and structural collapse. Modern excavations have revealed even deeper layers of mystery: dated ceramic fragments, traces of intense fire, evidence of sudden and catastrophic destruction, but also chronological inconsistencies that lead some archaeologists to question whether the biblical Jericho is the same Jericho that lies buried beneath the sands of time. And it is precisely this tension between narrative and evidence, between faith and science, that makes this story so fascinating. What you are about to discover may surprise you, because we will delve not only into the official history, but also into the archaeological background, scientific theories, and even the possibilities that physics and modern engineering offer us to understand how seemingly solid structures can collapse in unexpected ways. We will explore historical earthquakes in the region. We will examine ancient siege techniques. We will analyze the very construction of those walls and understand why perhaps they were destined to fall from the moment they were erected. Prepare yourself, because the truth about Jericho is far more complex and intriguing than any simplified version you've ever heard. And it all begins more than 3,000 years ago in a lost city in the desert that was already considered the oldest city in the world, even in that remote time. Think about that for a moment. When the Israelites finally sighted Jericho after 40 years of wandering in the desert, that city already had more than 5,000 years of continuous history. 5,000 years. That means Jericho was already ancient when the pyramids of Egypt were still just projects in the minds of the pharaohs. Its foundations date back to a time when agriculture had just been invented, when humanity was taking its first hesitant steps towards civilization, and there it stood, resisting, remaining, while empires rose and fell around it like waves crashing against immutable rocks. Jericho's location was no accident. It stood in the Jordan Valley, fed by springs that transformed the surrounding desert into a verdant oasis. Whoever controlled Jericho controlled the water. They controlled the trade routes connecting Mesopotamia to Egypt. They controlled the entrance to the highlands of Canaan, that territory which biblical texts called the Promised Land. It was a strategic position that justified every stone piled into those formidable walls. And the walls were just the beginning. Archaeological excavations have revealed that Jericho possessed not one, but 2 concentric lines of defense. The outer wall, built with enormous stone blocks, was almost 2 meters thick. 15 meters higher, a second wall protected the city's core. Between the two, an empty space designed to trap invaders in a deadly zone where they could be attacked from all sides. It was sophisticated, Military engineering for a time when most people still lived in tents. Within these impenetrable defenses, life flourished. Merchants traded spices from India. Artisans molded pottery with patterns that still impress today with their complexity. Priests performed rituals in temples dedicated to gods whose names were forgotten when their last worshippers turned to dust. Jericho was not just a military fortress. It was a center of culture, commerce, and power that radiated influence throughout the region. And then came the Israelites, a people without a city, without a king, with no apparent chance against a fortress that had withstood millennia of conflict. The biblical narrative describes Joshua, the leader who had assumed Moses' mantle, receiving divine instructions on how to conquer the unconquerable. Not through catapults or battering rams, not through prolonged sieges or tunnels dug under the walls, but through something that defied all military logic, faith transformed into collective action. For 6 days, the Israelite army marched around Jericho in total silence. Imagine the psychological impact. The defenders on the walls watched that strange procession, trying to understand the strategy, perhaps feeling for the first time something their ancestors had never known: fear. On the 7th day, after 7 laps, the trumpet sounded and the people shouted, and the walls fell. This is the story that has spanned centuries. But what really happened at that decisive moment? Comment below. Do you believe more in divine intervention, or are you looking for a scientific explanation? This question leads us directly to the heart of the mystery. Because to understand whether something supernatural happened, or whether natural forces were at play, we first need to understand exactly what these walls were. And here things get fascinating, because the more archaeologists excavate, the more complex the truth becomes. The walls of Jericho were not simple stone walls, piled up by inexperienced workers. They were works of engineering that demonstrated profound knowledge of structural resistance, lateral pressure, and tactical defense. The outer wall had its base built on a sloping embankment, a glacis covered with smooth stones that made any attempt at climbing impossible. Try to imagine soldiers carrying siege equipment, trying to climb a 45-degree ramp covered with rocks polished by time. Each step would be a struggle against gravity and balance. Behind that first barrier rose the wall itself, blocks of local limestone, some weighing hundreds of kilograms, fitted together with such precision that mortar was unnecessary in many sections. The construction technique revealed surprising secrets. The builders of Jericho used a method called cyclopean masonry, where irregular stones were arranged in such a way that the weight of each block helped support the adjacent ones. It was like a 3-dimensional puzzle, where removing one piece weakened the entire structure. And at the top of that outer wall, 15 meters above the ground, ran a patrol path where guards patrolled day and night. But the true genius lay in the second wall. Built atop the hill where the city sat, it created a system of defense in depth that turned any invasion into a tactical nightmare. Even if an army managed to scale or breach the outer wall, it would still have to traverse the empty space between the two defenses while being bombarded with arrows, stones, and boiling oil thrown from above, and then face a second, even higher, even thicker wall, protecting the heart of the city. This configuration was unprecedented in the region. It was innovation born of necessity, because Jericho controlled riches that attracted covetousness from all sides. Modern excavations have revealed something even more intriguing. Clay samples found between layers of stone show marks of intense burning, molten pottery, signs of temperatures that could only be reached by massive fires. And even more disturbing, these marks appear in layers dated exactly to the period that corresponds to the biblical narrative. Coincidence? Evidence? The transformation of interpretation depends on the mindset with which you approach the data. A secular archaeologist sees signs of conventional battle. A religious scholar sees confirmation of sacred texts. The truth probably dances somewhere between these perspectives. But there's another detail that's rarely mentioned, and that completely changes the dynamics of this story. The walls of Jericho, as impressive as they were, had a hidden vulnerability. They were built on alluvial soil, sediments deposited by millennia of flooding from the Jordan River. Soft soil, soil that moves, soil that dramatically amplifies seismic vibrations. Geologists who have studied the region confirm that the Jordan Valley lies on an active tectonic fault zone. Earthquakes were not uncommon. They were part of the reality of that land. Hand earthquakes in alluvial soil can cause a phenomenon called liquefaction, where the ground literally behaves like liquid for a few seconds, enough for heavy structures to sink or topple. So let's delve into the narrative that has spanned millennia and shaped the imagination of entire civilizations. The biblical account in the book of Joshua describes a sequence of events so specific, so detailed, that it seems almost like a military operations manual disguised as sacred text. Joshua receives precise instructions from a source that the text identifies as divine. The orders are clear, but seemingly absurd from a tactical point of view. For 6 consecutive days, the Israelite army was to march around the walls of Jericho once a day, in complete silence, accompanied only by 7 priests carrying 7 trumpets made of ram's horns. On the 7th day, everything would change. 7 laps around the city, and after the 7th lap, the trumpets were to sound and all the people were to shout with all their might. Consider the psychology of this strategy. The defenders of Jericho, accustomed to conventional sieges, to battering rams against gates, to attempts to scale walls, suddenly found themselves facing something completely out of the ordinary. An army that simply marched, that did not attack, that did not negotiate, that merely circled the city day after day in unsettling silence. The mental impact must have been devastating. Each passing day, the tension within the walls grew. Soldiers lost sleep wondering when the real attack would come. Families hid in basements. Children cried, feeling the fear of the adults. And that silence, that relentless silence broken only by the synchronized sound of thousands of feet marching across the dry land. The biblical text mentions a fascinating detail that many ignore. A prostitute named Rahab, who lived in a house built into the wall itself, had hidden Israelite spies days before the siege. In return, she received the promise that her family would be spared. She tied a red cord to her window as a sign of identification. When the walls fell, the text states that the section where Rahab's house stood remained standing. Archaeologists have found evidence of dwellings built within the thickness of the double walls, confirming that people did indeed live embedded within that defensive structure. And some excavations show sections of the wall that remained partially intact, while others collapsed completely. Narrative coincidence or selective preservation based on structural location? On the 7th day, after the 7th circuit, the trumpet sounded. The collective cry of thousands of voices echoed among the mountains surrounding the valley, and the walls fell. The Hebrew text uses a specific word that means to crumble inward and downward, as if the very foundation had given way. Not an outward collapse that would create a barrier of rubble, but an internal collapse that transformed the defenses into ramps of access for the invaders. This detail is crucial because it suggests a structural failure starting at the base, not an external impact that would bring down the walls outward. The difference matters when we try to reconstruct what really happened. The narrative continues with the city being rapidly engulfed, everything destroyed except for the precious metals dedicated to the sacred treasure. But was this a literal miracle, a direct divine intervention breaking the laws of physics? Or are we witnessing a journey where faith and natural phenomena met in a moment of perfect synchronicity? The truly intriguing question isn't whether the walls fell, because archaeological evidence confirms that at some point in Jericho's ancient history, there was a massive structural collapse. The real question is how. And here we enter territory where ancient engineering, acoustic physics, and an understanding of resonance meet in surprising ways. Modern researchers have begun to explore a fascinating possibility that connects the biblical account with well-established scientific principles. The idea that sound, vibration, and frequency can affect solid structures isn't science fiction, it's applied physics. Civil engineers have known for decades that every structure has a natural resonant frequency. When that frequency is struck by an external source, the structure begins to vibrate in an amplified way. It's the same principle that allows opera singers to shatter crystal glasses with their voices. The glass has a specific frequency, and when the voice hits exactly that note, the vibrations accumulate until the glass can no longer withstand it and shatters. Now imagine applying this concept to a much larger structure. The walls of Jericho, built with stone blocks on soft alluvial soil, were already in a state of structural vulnerability. British archaeologist John Garstang, who excavated Jericho in the 1930s, documented something intriguing. The walls were not brought down by external impact. They crumbled inward and downward, exactly as the biblical text describes. Garstang observed that the stone blocks showed signs of having been shaken from their positions, not pushed. The difference is subtle but crucial. A battering ram pushes, an earthquake shakes. A resonant vibration does both simultaneously from the inside out. Italian archaeologist Kathleen Kenyon, who re-excavated the site in the 1950s, disputed some of Garstang's dating, but confirmed the collapse. Pattern. She found layers of destruction that indicated a sudden and catastrophic event, not a prolonged siege. There were no signs of famine within the city. The grain stores were full, suggesting that the end came too quickly for resources to be consumed. This aligns perfectly with a narrative of sudden collapse after only 7 days of siege, not months of blockade, as was typical in ancient warfare. But there's another layer to this revelation: acoustic engineering studies conducted by modern. Researchers have shown that ram's horn trumpets, played in unison by multiple musicians, can generate extremely powerful low-frequency sound waves. These infrasound waves travel through the ground more efficiently than through the air, and when they hit structures built on soft ground, they can initiate vibrations that accumulate. Add to that the impact of thousands of voices shouting simultaneously, creating their own pressure waves, and you have a recipe for concentrated structural stress. Stanford University geologist Amos Noor has spent decades studying seismic activity in the ancient Middle East. He documented that the Jordan Valley region experienced significant earthquakes approximately every 100 years. His research suggests that the collapse of Jericho may have coincided with one of these natural seismic events. The synchronicity between the Israelites' ritual action and an earthquake would not be a miracle in the sense of breaking natural laws, but rather divine timing, working through natural processes. A shift in perspective that allows both faith and science to coexist without contradiction. This journey between science and faith takes us to even deeper territory, because ultimately, the truth hidden behind the walls of Jericho lies not only in the stones that fell, but in what that event represented for an entire people. The Israelites had spent 40 years wandering in the desert. An entire generation was born and died without knowing a permanent home. They carried the promise of a land they had never seen, trusting in something greater than themselves. And then, faced with the first great barrier, with walls that seemed insurmountable, they receive instructions that defy all military logic. March. Just march. Trust. The transformation that occurred in those 7 days was not merely physical, it was psychological, spiritual, existential. Each lap around those walls was an act of surrender to the incomprehensible. Each silent step was a declaration that there were forces operating beyond what the eyes could see. And when the walls finally fell, whether by earthquake, acoustic resonance, or direct divine intervention, the impact on the mindset of those people was absolute. They had witnessed that the impossible becomes possible when there is alignment between human action and universal timing. For millions of people throughout the centuries, Jericho has become more than an ancient battle. It has become a metaphor. Each person faces their own insurmountable walls, health problems that seem unsolvable, broken relationships that seem irreparable, financial situations that seem hopeless, addictions that seem stronger than any willpower, and the story of Jericho whispers through the millennia: keep marching, keep doing your part even when it doesn't make sense, keep trusting that there are forces working behind the scenes of reality that you cannot see or control. Theologians from all Abrahamic traditions find profound meaning in this narrative. For Jews, Jericho represents the first victory in the Promised Land, proof that the covenant with the divine was real and active. For Christians, it becomes a symbol of how faith can overcome obstacles that reason deems permanent. For Muslims, who also revere Joshua as a prophet, the story teaches about obedience and trust, even in the face of the incomprehensible. Each tradition draws slightly different lessons, but all converge on a central point. There are mysteries operating at the intersection between human will and cosmic order. But the question that truly burns in the heart of anyone who hears this story is personal and immediate. Does this type of intervention still happen? In our world of satellites and smartphones, of quantum physics and artificial intelligence, is there still room for the inexplicable to break the laws we think are absolute? Or was Jericho a unique moment in history, a window that closed 3,000 years ago? The answer depends entirely on how you define miracle. If miracle means violation of natural laws, then perhaps Jericho teaches us something different. Perhaps it teaches us that the divine works through natural laws, not despite them. That perfect timing is as miraculous as the suspension of gravity. That the decision to keep marching when everything seems futile can synchronize you with forces that were already in motion, just waiting for you to arrive at the right place at the right time. Comment below. Have you ever experienced a moment where the impossible became possible? Let me tell you something that will completely change how you see this story. Excavations in Jericho didn't start yesterday. They've been going on for over 100 years, and each layer of earth removed reveals fascinating contradictions, evidence that sometimes confirms the biblical narrative and other times complicates it in unexpected ways. The first archaeologist to systematically excavate the site was Ernst Sellin. Between 1907 and 1909, he found the foundations of the double walls exactly as the ancient texts described. But it was John Garstang, working in the 1930s, who made the most dramatic discoveries. Garstang unearthed evidence of massive destruction by fire. He found ceramic jars still full of charred grain, suggesting that the city fell so quickly that its inhabitants didn't have time to consume their supplies. He also documented that the walls had collapsed outwards and downwards, creating rubble, ramps that would have facilitated invasion exactly as the book of Joshua describes. But here comes the twist that transforms everything into an even deeper mystery. When Kathleen Kenyon re-excavated the site in the 1950s, using more advanced techniques, she reached different conclusions about the dating. Her pottery analyses suggested that the destruction Garstang had attributed to the Israelite conquest actually occurred around 1550 BC, about 150 years before the period, traditionally associated with the Exodus and the conquest of Canaan. This discrepancy created a debate that continues to this day. Some archaeologists argue that the biblical chronology needs to be adjusted. Others suggest that there were multiple layers of destruction and Kenyon simply examined the wrong one. And a third group proposes that the biblical narrative may be a composite of events that occurred in different periods, consolidated into a single epic story. The latest revelations come from technologies that Garstang and Kenyon never dreamed they had access to. Ground-penetrating radar has revealed buried structures that have not yet been excavated. Carbon-14 dating of organic materials found in the layers of destruction is refining the dating with ever-increasing precision, and geological studies of the soil beneath the walls have confirmed what we suspected. The foundation was extremely vulnerable to seismic activity. Laboratory tests have shown that the specific type of alluvial clay upon which Jericho was built can liquefy under moderate seismic pressure, causing heavy structures to sink or topple in a matter of seconds. One of the most intriguing discoveries behind the scenes of this archaeological investigation comes from chemical analysis of the ashes found in the destruction layers. The fire that consumed Jericho burned at extremely high temperatures, much higher than would be typical of accidental fires or even common arson attacks. Some researchers suggest this indicates the deliberate use of accelerants, perhaps oil or resin, supporting the biblical narrative that the city was systematically burned after being conquered. Others argue that such high temperatures could result from the combustion of large quantities of stored grain, creating a furnace effect that would intensify any initial flame. The impact of these discoveries on the academic community has been profound and divisive. Each new piece of evidence is interpreted through the lens of whoever examines it. For biblical archaeologists, each confirmation is validation of the historicity of the sacred texts. For skeptics, the chronological inconsistencies are proof that the narrative is more legend than history. And for those in between, Jericho represents something more subtle, the possibility that real events were preserved through oral tradition, gaining layers of theological meaning over centuries before finally being written down. What makes Jericho so fascinating is precisely this unresolved tension between explanations. And perhaps the most important question is not which side is right, but why we feel this compulsive need to choose only one. We live in an era that values scientific certainties above all else, where every phenomenon needs to be explained, measured, replicated in the laboratory. And yet, billions of people around the world maintain faith in realities that transcend the measurable. Jericho lives precisely on this uncomfortable border where both worlds collide. From a purely scientific point of view, we have a perfectly plausible explanation. active seismic zone, walls built on vulnerable ground, geological evidence of historical earthquakes in the region, the possibility that low-frequency acoustic vibrations generated by trumpets and shouts could have initiated or amplified the structural collapse. Add to that the timing, and you have a rare but not impossible event, a convergence of natural factors that produced a dramatic result at the precise moment. For many scientists, this explanation is satisfactory, elegant even. It doesn't require suspending the laws of physics, only understanding how these laws can produce seemingly miraculous results under specific conditions. But from a religious point of view, reducing Jericho to a mere geological coincidence robs the story of its deeper meaning. The issue is not just that the walls fell, but when they fell, after exactly 7 days of ritual marching, at the exact moment of the collective cry. The precision of this synchronicity is what points to divine intentionality. For people of faith, God works through natural processes, not despite them. An earthquake at the right time is no less miraculous for being an earthquake. It is more miraculous precisely because it demonstrates sovereignty over the timing of natural events. The decision to march, to trust, to obey seemingly absurd instructions, all of this becomes part of the mechanism through which the divine acts in history. And here is the hidden truth that is rarely discussed. Both perspectives can be right simultaneously. The modern mindset forces us to choose between natural explanation or supernatural intervention, as if they were mutually exclusive. But perhaps reality is more nuanced. Perhaps the universe operates in layers of causality that our language cannot yet adequately capture. Quantum physics has already shown us that particles can exist in multiple states until they are observed, that the act of measuring changes the outcome, that there are fundamental mysteries in the very structure of reality that challenge our intuition about how things work. Applying this mindset to Jericho, we can imagine an event where natural causes and transcendent intention intertwine inseparably, where a people following spiritual instructions synchronize their actions with geological forces already in motion, where the inner transformation of faith finds outward manifestation in the collapse of physical barriers. This is not a weak compromise between faith and science. It is a synthesis that honors the complexity of both, that recognizes that mystery is not the same as ignorance, and that some truths live comfortably in ambiguity without needing definitive resolution. The impact of this expanded perspective is profound because it liberates us from the prison of binary thinking. You don't need to abandon rationality to maintain faith. You don't need to discard spiritual experience to accept scientific explanations. Jericho can simultaneously be a documented historical event and a theological symbol laden with meaning that transcends physical facts. Comment below if this perspective makes sense to you, or if it still seems too contradictory. This story has endured for 3 millennia, not because the walls were particularly high or because the battle was especially bloody. It has survived because it touches on something universal in the human experience. We all face walls. We all look at obstacles that seem insurmountable and feel that tightness in our chest that whispers that perhaps it's impossible. And then Jericho appears as a whisper from the past saying, "Keep marching. Keep doing your part, even when it seems insane." Because there are forces at work that you can't see. The legacy of Jericho transcended religious and cultural boundaries in fascinating ways. For African American communities during slavery and later during the civil rights movement, the spirituals that sang about the falling walls of Jericho weren't just about an ancient city. They were code. They were hope. They were the promise that systems of oppression that seemed eternal could also suddenly crumble when the time was right. When Martin Luther King Jr. spoke of standing on the mountaintop and seeing the promised land, he was invoking the same narrative that began with Joshua looking at Jericho. In world literature, Jericho has become a recurring metaphor for any seemingly permanent barrier. Writers use it to talk about psychological walls we build to protect ourselves, but that end up imprisoning us. Therapists invoke it when discussing how destructive patterns can be broken through consistent action even when progress is not immediately visible. Entrepreneurs cite it when facing markets dominated by established giants, remembering that even invincible fortresses have hidden vulnerabilities waiting to be exploited. But perhaps the most profound impact of Jericho lies in what it teaches about perseverance through uncertainty. The Israelites marching around those walls had no guarantees, There was no signed contract promising that on the seventh day everything would work out. They only had instructions that defied common sense and a collective decision to trust. Think of the courage that requires. Not the courage of a single heroic action, but the more difficult courage of continuing to do something seemingly futile day after day. The courage to appear foolish in the eyes of the defenders laughing on the walls. The courage to maintain faith when every rational fiber of your being is screaming that it won't work. This is the real transformation that Jericho offers. It's not about physical walls. It's about the inner journey of those who decide to continue even without seeing the complete path. It's about the revelation that sometimes the process is as important as the result. Those 7 days of silent marching transformed a multitude of freed slaves into a unified people. Each lap around the city was a collective declaration of identity and purpose. When the walls finally fell, they were no longer victims of history. They were agents of it. And here's something that's rarely discussed behind the scenes of this narrative. The biblical text records that after Jericho, Joshua cursed the place, declaring that anyone who tried to rebuild the city would pay a terrible price. And for centuries, Jericho remained in ruins. Not because it was impossible to rebuild, but because the event had acquired such great symbolic weight that no one dared to challenge it. The power of a well-told story can be more enduring than any physical structure. The stone walls crumbled in a day. The memory of that collapse remains alive 3,000 years later, influencing decisions, inspiring movements, giving courage to those who need to face their own impossibilities. But let me ask you something that really matters now. After all that we've explored, after walking through archaeological excavations, analyzing acoustic physics, discussing theology and geology, after seeing how this story shaped social movements and inspired millions throughout the centuries, what is your conclusion? Because in the end, the truth about Jericho isn't just buried under desert sands or hidden in ancient scrolls. It lives in the interpretation that each of us chooses to give to the facts. And that choice reveals much more about who we are than about what actually happened 3,000 years ago. I want you to stop for a moment and reflect honestly. When you look at your own insurmountable walls, those obstacles in your life that seem like they'll never fall, which narrative gives you more strength? The idea that the universe can conspire in your favor when you do your part, or the understanding that consistent persistence eventually finds the hidden vulnerabilities in any system? Perhaps it's both. Perhaps the right answer is the one that keeps you marching when all seems lost. And here's the invitation I'm extending to you. Scroll down in the comments and tell me, do you think the walls of Jericho fell due to direct divine intervention, a perfectly timed earthquake, amplified acoustic resonance, or a combination of all of these things that our language still can't adequately describe? But it doesn't stop there. Tell me also, what wall in your life needs to fall? It doesn't have to be specific if you don't want to. It can just be a word. It can simply be an acknowledgement that you too are marching around something that seems impossible, waiting for the 7th day. Because the real magic of this channel, the transformation that happens here, isn't just me telling you stories. It's the community we're building together. People of different beliefs, different backgrounds, different perspectives, all fascinated by the mysteries that connect our present with a distant but still living past. Every comment you leave adds a layer of meaning to the discussion. Every shared insight illuminates angles I alone would never see. If you enjoyed this profound journey through Jericho, please leave a sincere like. Not only because it helps the channel grow, although it really does, but because it's a way for you to say that stories like this, told with such depth and respect for complexity, deserve to exist. And subscribe to the channel because every week I bring narratives that explore these fascinating intersections between faith and science, between history and myth, between what we know and what remains mysterious. And look, if you have friends who love this kind of discussion, who like to think deeply about historical events, who appreciate approaches that don't oversimplify or artificially choose sides, share this video with them, because we need more spaces where difficult questions can be explored without dogmatism from either side, where ambiguity is not weakness, but intellectual honesty. Comment below miracle, science, or something beyond both.